Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever it is, wherever you are joining us from today. I want to welcome everybody to today's community conversation. We'll just wait here for a few minutes as people are joining. And while we're doing that, we always have a fun time of just shouting out where you're at. So if you go to the chat and just say where you're joining us from today. Yeah, David, Philadelphia, we were just talking about you. You're a regular. We got Saul, of course, Boston.
Currently.
Yeah. Go to neighborhoods. Stephen in Milwaukee. Dave, Queen Creek. Oh, yeah, Phoenix area. Welcome. Ruffle, Krakow. Sarah, Alexandria, Leon, Brooklyn. Nice distribution here. Only two Europe, two over in Europe right now. So need some more representation over there. Nate, Virginia Beach, Ray, Orlando, David, Atlanta. Oh, yeah, Rotterdam. Yeah, excellent. We'll give it another minute here as people are joining in. Birmingham, Josh. Well, you used to be Europe.
Still European,
yes,
well, not continental.
Yeah, the EU thing. Tarleton, Tucson. Welcome. So we got a couple Arizonans. Oh, wow. To what do we owe this honor? We have the esteemed Paul Aben joining us today. Welcome, Paul. There's your personal welcome into the space. All right. I'm just having too much fun today. It's spring. I'm getting excited.
Me too.
All
Bring
right.
on the sunshine.
Well, let's kick it off. All right. Welcome to today's community conversation. My name is Sean Hurley, and I'll be your community host. We are joined by Saul Amor and Jacob in spirit today, and talking on a topic of Dynamo. So let's kick it off. Their community conversations are sorry about that, Saul. I jumped the gun on that one.
No worries.
Scott explained. Community conversations are virtual meetups featuring expert speakers from across the community. Sessions range from deep dives, tips and tricks, and live demonstrations on products such as AutoCAD, Revit, Dynamo, Fusion 360, roundtable on industry. It's all kinds of stuff. Emerging insights. All experience levels in most cases, beginning through expert. Just a quick note, fun legal stuff, if you will, Saul. The safe harbor statement is just in case we make any forward-looking statements on any of our products. So we only ask that if you make any purchase decisions, that you make those on the state that the product is today. So nothing on forward-looking, future stuff. Some ground rules and suggestions. The lines are muted to reduce background noise. We do invite you to turn on your cameras to kind of give an in-person feel in a digital world right now, whatever you're comfortable with. If you'd like to ask a question, you can do that in the chat, or you can raise your hand using the Zoom function in the bottom right. If you have something topical to what Saul was talking about, or Jacob, feel free to ask at that time, but there will be a Q&A session at the end. The session is always recorded, and a link will be posted to the event page, as well as the YouTube, oh gosh, what is that? We got a whole long channel list of Dynamo sessions. This is number 26 or
26, I think.
Yeah, it's 26 or 27, so welcome everybody. Introduction time. I'm Sean Hurley. I'm Autodesk Community Engagement Manager. I'm a geeky technologist located in sunny, chilly Bend, Oregon.
Nice. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Saul. A pleasure to meet you all. Nice to see some familiar faces and some fresh ones to this session. So I'm the product manager for Dynamo here at Autodesk. I describe myself as a curious human being, originally from New Zealand, but now based in Boston, Massachusetts. So if there's anything that doesn't make sense, if some slang sneaks out, just let me know. Happy to clarify. And Jacob here, well, is not here today. He is here in, trigger happy. He is here in spirit. So he has some pre-recorded stuff that we're going to show today, in particular the demo at the tail end of the session, doing some pretty fun things with transactions and element binding. But he is apologetic that he couldn't make this. He's just a little bit slammed right now. So without further ado, number 26 in the Dynamo Office Hours sessions is around building more with Dynamo. So specifically talking about the connection with Revit and Dynamo. We had one previous session, which was sort of a gentle introduction. This one starts to talk a little bit more about some more esoteric topics. And then we're gonna have a further session in about a month or 6 weeks from now around the Dynamo interaction with the Revit API specifically. So that one should be pretty awesome. Sushma is saying my voice is not clear. Jacob, sorry, Sean.
You sound fine here. Might be your connection, Sushma.
Apologies for that. I'll try to speak a little louder if that's good. So without further ado, what are we going to do today? We're going to be having an agenda, same as usual, which is around a 20-minute presentation. So this is on building more with Dynamo, and not quite live demonstrations, a pre-recorded 20-minute presentation from Jacob. So not really danger music this time, unless my PowerPoint decides not to play a video, and then a Q&A session as well. But as Sean mentioned, please do interrupt me if you want to, stick up your hand, come off mute, and write something in the chat, whatever you wish. This is supposed to be a conversation as opposed to a presentation. So encourage a lot of sort of interaction and dialogue back and forth. So without further ado, getting into the nuts and bolts of stuff. So with Revit, you might be familiar with this term called element binding. And if not, we're going to talk about it now. This is also noted as session trace data, sometimes, especially in the GitHub repository of Dynamo. And what this is a way for Revit and Dynamo to connect to each other and understand when you're making content that there is a connection there. And when you have a graph that has, for example, created some family content in Revit, when you open it another time after the first time you've used it, there is a link between the content you've created and the Dynamo graph that created it, which enables that Dynamo graph to update the content as opposed to create it again from scratch. So very, very useful, not without its intricacies as well. But in essence, its primary purpose is to prevent duplicate element creation. So if you want to be able to create, say, trees across a surface, you don't want to create thousands and thousands of trees in the same spot using the same graph. We want you to create one, and then if you have to move it, just to move that one you've already created. So this works across Dynamo sessions, as I mentioned, has some pros, has a couple of cons. So the pros are that we can revise what we made before, which is awesome. We can update stuff. We can also keep subsequent element data. So if you have a chain of events and things going on, you can utilize those in pretty awesome ways. On the con side, it doesn't make new elements without removing the old. So there's some intricacies when it comes to dealing in specifics with parameter data. And then also slower once binding is initiated. So if you ever open up a Dynamo graph that just feels weirdly slow for no reason, in particular, maybe a Dynamo player graph, you could go in and delete the binding data from that, and it should actually speed that up again. Because Dynamo and Dynamo Revit have to talk to each other and have to read that data every single time they go into that Dynamo graph. And if that data is referring to elements that don't actually exist, it's just going to cause some slowdown. So feel free to go in and delete that. I think we've talked about that in a previous session. Jacob did. If not, if you Google sort of delete element binding or session trace data on the forum, there's definitely a post on that one too. So another thing to note on element binding is that if the node is made out of the box by us, it is going to bind by default. So any sort of out of the box Dynamo Revit nodes are going to bind. Depending on how a package author has created nodes, it may or may not bind, depending on the way they engage with the Revit API in particular. And so if you want to create different paradigms that don't utilize element binding, you can choose to bind or not bind with your own sort of custom Python code, custom C# or zero touch nodes. And then there's also one sort of sneaky case with function passing, if you're aware of what that is, which means that in a singular session, Dynamo is going to keep moving the element, but if you open and close that file, it's going to, in essence, not save it or not serialize it to the graph. And therefore, when you open that graph for another time, it's going to create a new element. This may be useful, again, using trees as an analogy. If you want to randomly populate a surface area with trees, you could do that using a sort of sneaky function passing approach or creating your own nodes. So in essence, element binding is the way that Revit and Dynamo can talk to each other and can understand how to connect a singular element with a singular graph. If you want to have a really deep dive on this content, Jacob did a AU masterclass at the last AU before we all went sort of remote for a couple of years. There's a link there on the screen. We can provide these in the chat as well, post the session. And also there's a forum post where Jacob also goes in depth to talk about sort of like a TLDR, too long didn't read, of his AU masterclass as well. Really esoteric topic, gets quite technical, but also when you get the bare bones and basics of it, you can start to understand how to manipulate it and work with it and make it work to your advantage. Right, so beyond the element binding, session trace data, the next sort of major interesting piece that comes into the Dynamo and Revit world is transactions. So Revit itself uses transactions. Every time you create something, it commits it as a transaction, and that's really what is happening in your undo and redo stack. So if you make a mistake and you do Control Z or you click down on the undo, that is using transactions to log what has been done. So therefore you can undo or redo that content. So Dynamo also needs to talk to Revit in a transactional way. And this is how we record the changes that happen from a Dynamo graph. So a couple of interesting pieces about this is you cannot ask for specifics about something until it exists. So maybe you've created a graph in the past and you're like, why is this not working? It really should be working. And then you sort of close it, you open it up another time, and then it just magically works. It just works the second time. And this is because if you're creating something and then trying to refer to that same thing inside of a singular Dynamo session, you might run into a problem where you haven't actually taken the thing you've created from Dynamo and actually baked it in or transacted it inside of the Revit document. So Revit needs to know it exists before you can do subsequent actions to it. So one way to get around that is to use these nodes inside of Dynamo called transaction.start and transaction.end. And sort of somewhat inversely, you would want to put a transaction end node first and then use another transaction start node if you want to break up your graph to do multiple different things, which is really what you see on the GIF here right now. It's where Jacob is needing to derive or create content from something that is created inside of Dynamo, in this case, lines and dimensions. So the way Dynamo basically handles transactions is every single thing that has happened in a Dynamo script, if you're not using transaction end and transaction start nodes, is wrapped into a singular Dynamo sort of transaction in Revit. So you'll notice in the world of Revit, if you click undo or redo, you'll be able to see Dynamo and a bunch of different numbers at the end. It's just like a global unique identifier. And that is every single thing wrapped up. If you use transaction end and transaction start, there's going to be multiple ones of those. And if you want to undo and redo, it's going to take multiple times to do it. So this is a way for you to start playing with and controlling the content that you make inside of Dynamo with transactions. Also, another deep esoteric topic, but once you get the basics and start to understand how it works, it really does start to make a bit of sense, and it can really superpower your work inside of the Dynamo Revit ecosystem. Beyond transactions, we also have application environments. So this is where Revit has sort of different worlds within which things can play, and Dynamo can talk to those different worlds. So Revit actually has multiple different application environments. So you'll be familiar with the Revit project, also referred to as the Revit document, if we're talking about nodes in Dynamo, because they refer to the Revit API, and this is how the Revit API talks about Revit projects, but also things like the conceptual massing environment, which is a little different to the family document, which is also a little different to the adaptive component document. So suffice it to say that all you really need to know is if you want to do work in one of these worlds, the best way to do that is actually to open up that world first before you open up Dynamo. So if you want to make something in the conceptual massing environment, open up that conceptual massing environment first before you go and open up Dynamo. And then the way to work with that will be much easier than if you try to do it with the sort of more technical approach about pushing and pulling things through background documents, which we'll talk about in a second. So this is just an example on screen showing the exact same graph, which is really just making cuboids existent in both the Revit sort of family document and also the Revit project document. Big takeaway is work in the right place. The place that you want to do work is the place you should engage Dynamo from. All right, documenting the conversation. So this is how to read and write stuff to Revit's ecosystem. So, the standard way is just using Dynamo nodes and doing things in the correct application environment, like we just talked about. So that is using the Revit API and using nodes to do things. Again, referred to as a document here, but you can also do stuff headlessly. So when we're talking about sort of software, we talk about two different kind of modes of application. You have headless and headed. So headed refers to having vision or eyes or a UI, a user interface. So this is when you open up Dynamo normally. You can also use a headless version of Dynamo, which is the CLI or the command line interface, which is just running through your command prompt or terminal. And you have to type only in text. You don't get to see anything. There's no UI component. So what this means is that you can actually open up Revit stuff in the background without actually opening up Revit as well. So if you're using Dynamo Sandbox, or if you're using a particular version of Revit open in Dynamo inside of Revit, but you want to open a different project or a different family and do things to it, you can. The one thing to be super mindful about here is you have to sort of close the loop. So if you're opening in the background something and you want to make changes to that thing, so say it's a table family, you open up the table family, you want to push some data into it without actually opening up the table family because it's faster actually to do it headlessly, you must make those changes, save those changes, and then save that back to the family on disk or back to the family inside of that project. If you don't, those changes just exist in the memory space. That means they're floating around, they're not committed, they're not saved, and they're going to get lost as soon as you finish that session. So some of the nodes that you can use to do this, there's some really cool packages out there. There's a couple out of the box nodes as well, but these packages may be doing it better as it stands right now. So Rhythm package from John Pearson has some cool stuff to do opening document files. So this is Revit projects in the background. You can also do really cool things like upgrade files without actually having to open them, which saves a lot of time. You can do that with multiple different files, multiple different families, and do all of that sort of management of content in the background. And then Genius Loci package from Alban also allows you to do things like with the family document too. There's other packages out there that do that. And like I said, there are a couple out of the box nodes too, and they should be mostly interchangeable. You can also do really cool things with this is like creating geometry inside of Dynamo and then generating a family and applying sort of parameter data to that from inside of Dynamo without ever opening up the Revit family document too. So some really cool stuff that can happen. It takes a little bit of extrapolation and sort of like left field thinking because you don't get to see it. So you kind of have to trust the process or trust your algorithm or trust your graph. But you can then go and open it up after the fact if you want to sort of wrap your head around how that works. All right, another concept to think about. Yes, often trusting the computer too much, Stephen. Yep, can be a problem for sure, agreed. Always staying up to date. So there is a bunch of different nodes inside of Dynamo Revit that are kind of special in some ways, and they always update based on changing in graph context, and not necessarily the run of the graph, which most nodes sort of make changes from. These nodes are going to change based on sort of contextual changes that happen in the background. So this is around particularly collection nodes, selection nodes, and drop-down nodes. So with the selection nodes, it doesn't really matter that they change in the background because you as a user are going to actually choose when you want to select stuff. For drop-down nodes, again, you're probably going to take an action to choose that stuff as well. But for the collection nodes, that might trip you up. And we've got a little GIF that we're going to show around staying up to date that Jacob put together to show some of the potential issues that arise from this. So the takeaway here is to be careful. Be careful when you're creating content in Revit from your Dynamo graph that these nodes are going to pick up on. So maybe your graph is sort of somewhat circular and it says create something, do something to it, because these nodes are going to automatically pick up on those changes back in your Revit document. So you can get into sort of infinite loop situations, which our GIF is going to talk about soon as well. And for the technically minded amongst you who are curious about sort of exploring this a little further, on the Dynamo GitHub, you can search, or the Dynamo Revit GitHub, sorry, you can search for this thing or function called a Revit Services Updater, and this is what triggers that automatic update as well. And for anyone building package nodes, you could also utilize this too if you wanted the same behavior. So, ensue discretion. Please take this carefully. But before we jump into that, I noticed there was a question by Talton in the chat, which was, can you use this for setting project coordinates headlessly? Yes, you should be able to do this, Tarleton, for sure. So you could sort of derive numerous different projects from a singular instance as the sort of like conceptual level of how this works, which is pretty awesome. So without further ado, moving on to a graph. Hopefully this is legible on people's screens. I'm going to go through it briefly, and then we're going to see a GIF of this in action. So this graph here is going to generate content. It's going to wait a couple of seconds, and then it's going to generate more content based on the last item that was generated previously. So it's going to collect every single line inside of a line element inside of a document. It's going to get the location of the last line in the list. So notice this is a trip up point, because if you're collecting the last of something and you're generating something in that category, you're going to start running into these kind of infinite loop problems. So the big text piece in the center is Jacob building in a sort of a break point, as we call it in software, in the software world, which is a way to sort of like exit that loop before it causes too much problems. And you'll notice that he crashed 7 times trying to generate this GIF before he realized he should probably build this breakpoint into it, which is kind of just like a safety latch or a get out of jail free card. So after we've collected the last location line in the list, we're going to go then and build a perpendicular line to that line that is 3/4 as long as the current line, and then use function passing, which I mentioned earlier, to sort of sneakily stop element binding getting into the graph, and then building a model curve and ending that transaction. So for the second half of the graph, after we've ended that transaction, which means we've now saved that thing that we've created inside of a singular Dynamo graph back to Revit, so we know that we can refer to it. We have a Python script that just waits 3 seconds. And then after we wait 3 seconds, we're going to then go and pull those location lines again, get that last element again, and do it again. And this is going to cause a loop. And so this is going to create an arrowhead at the end of the curve and create a filled region to show that arrowhead shape. So if we want to see this in action, this is the infinite loop that we have created in this graph here, which is taking a model line again, waiting a few seconds, committing that model line, waiting a few seconds, and then generating one that is 3/4 as long again, and running again and again and again and again and again and again and again. So the infinite loop situation. If you've ever created a graph that just seems to hang forever and does nothing, chances are likely you've generated an infinite loop situation like this. And so, based on today in the conversations and maybe some deep diving into this a little later, you should be a little bit more aware about what an infinite loop is and how to sort of navigate this situation, which generically and conceptually means if you're creating something in the same graph that you're trying to refer to, be careful, because you're potentially in an infinite loop situation like we're demonstrating here on screen. So this one only runs about 6 or 7 different times. You would eventually run into inbuilt Revit limitations where the size of the line becomes too small. And that means, the lowest line is going to kick it out from the Revit side. All right, that's enough talking for me. We now have a, in spirit Jacob presentation, a not so live demo. And this one's going to be focused mostly on element binding as opposed to sort of the infinite loop we just saw in transactions.
Hey, everybody. Sorry I can't be with you again this week. I did have to, unfortunately, attend another training tomorrow. Hope this is going to be the last one of these that interferes, because I really do enjoy getting to present to you guys and interact with the larger community. No guarantees, though, but I am doing my best to sort of free up the hour going forward. In the meantime, I did want to make sure we had a good sort of example of how element binding works inside of Dynamo. If you have further questions on this topic, I recommend checking out my AU class, Getting the Good Stuff Out of Pandora's Box, Element Binding in Dynamo for Revit. You can search element binding on the AU website. You can search Pandora. Hopefully Sol or Sean will be able to paste that link in there for everybody to sort of be able to grab. So let's start by having a look at what I've got. I've got nothing up my sleeve. I've got 3 filled regions over here. I've got my standard sort of brick shape, and I've got a basic drafting pattern. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to open up this file. This file, what it is, I'm doing 2 things. It's currently 12:06 by my system time that I've had to manipulate here. All right, so now we can see this bottom section. What this is going to do, I'm going to just hit run. This section is using some points to define Roman numerals and then using coordinate systems to put them into place. This section up here is using points and the current date and time by taking the fraction of the half day dividing the current hours by 12, by negative 360, the fraction of the hour, dividing the current minute value, so 6 by 60, multiplying that by negative 360, and then the current second time, 53, divided by 60, multiplying that by 360. So we're getting sort of 53/60ths of negative 360 or 318 degrees. And then we're going to rotate our identity coordinate system, our global X, Y, and Z axes from the origin by that number of degrees. Use that to transform our polygons that we've defined to generate our hands of our clock. And there you have it. Nothing's changed in Revit yet, right? I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to say File, Save As. We're going to call this one bound. And then when I save this, we're going to then wire in this and this. And that's going to take this from a function state, light gray, into an executed state. And when I run this graph, I've now generated a clock in Dynamo, which is pretty cool, right? Nothing too crazy, nothing to write home about, but it is kind of worth noting. Now, I did have this stuff sort of saved before. When I ran this, this is now saying it's in a stale state. Let's go ahead and save that code. And then notice if I update this, if I run it in periodic run mode, you can see that content sort of moving around, which is pretty cool. We're able to basically every second or so move the hand around the clock, which is pretty cool. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to hit manual because I don't want to reopen this in periodic. Super dangerous to do that, but I had a clock. I had to show you guys rotating a clock hand, right? In particularly because this isn't a family that I'm setting. I'm actually drawing filled regions for all this stuff, which is kind of cool. All right, so in any case, enough tooting my own horn. This content needs to be saved. I'm going to save this once more, and now you can see that file. Now, all I did functionally in Dynamo, all I really did was I drew some connectors here, right? Otherwise, it should be the exact same as that previous file, right? Let's check that. So we're going to pop over here. Here's clock, no creation yet. 62 kilobytes, 111 kilobytes. Something has changed. We're going to open up these two files. I'm double clicking on the file. I've set BYN files to automatically open in Notepad++. This is my preferred method to opening Dynamo files, which sounds crazy, but the reason for that is it's really nice to be able to view the raw text in sort of a structured format, as opposed to being stuck swimming in kind of the larger scope. But you can go through and you can sort of see we've defined out what the individual nodes on the canvas are. And then the other thing that I'm going to do here, I'm going to make sure synchronize vertical scrolling. So as I scroll through this, it's scrolling through that as well, right? Which is super useful because you can see these files are functionally exactly the same. No matter how far I scroll, we're seeing the same stuff, right? Until we're not. There's a big difference here. Got something called bindings up here. I've got something called bindings here. They're at slightly different lines, which isn't really a big deal. But the big problem here between these two files is if I turn on word wrap, all of this gobbledygook is base 64 encoded strings of base 64 encoded strings of a dictionary that says, this is the element that this node created. And it's storing that element by that element's GUID and its element ID. Again, technical stuff, check out my AU session to get a little bit more under the hood, but all that stuff gets stored there. We're going to turn off word wrap for now, just so we can sort of see kind of that raw structure without sort of the gobbledygook getting in the way as it sort of pans down. We're 5 minutes into the demo, so I'm gonna not finish. I'm not gonna run long, I promise this time. All right, so now we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna close out these two files because I don't want them sort of getting messed up over here. And then we're gonna come back here. I'm gonna close this file. I've already saved it. And what do we think is gonna actually happen if I now open up that file again and then hit run? We've got a new clock on top of a new clock, and we can hit run as many times as we might like, and it's going to actually just sort of create new clocks as long as that data is sort of refreshing, right? So we're going to set this into periodic run mode. I'm going to go ahead and save that, switch this back over to manual. Whoops, I did not mean to double click there. Save that once more. And let's look at this one more time. All right. So with those two, that clock sort of set up the way it's set up, we're going to say File Open. We're going to choose Bound in manual execution mode. And then we hit Run. It did not create a copy of the clock. Why? What it did was it previously serialized in that content when I was in periodic run mode. Said, hey, they want to be able to modify this content and sort of store it. I keep double clicking by accident, and store it inside the file, right? I know that Jacob doesn't want to have sort of a clock hand showing every possible time of day. He just wants the time that it was last run at. So let's save that data the way it ran here, right? Back into the file, right? Again, any change on there, and it's going to say, hey, this is updated. Save the file. We can then close out the file. And then we can say to open up the bound file in manual execution mode and run again. And it's going to grab what was created before and say, I don't want you to be what was created before anymore. I want you to be what's new. Open the bound file in manual execution mode and hit run. And it didn't happen that time. Why? Because I did not save the graph in between point A and point B. I know I looks like I was just doing this cheekily by before, accidentally hitting the button on the canvas. No, that was legit. I was intending to do that. We have to make a modification to the graph. We have to tell the graph that we want to save it in between those runs. Otherwise, the bindings don't get saved to the file. All right. So we'll try this one more time. Opening up number 1, bound, manual execution mode, hitting run, making any kind of modification to the graph, even one that we could have quickly undone, and then hitting save. Binding saved to the file. Let's look at the one that doesn't have bindings, no creation yet. How could we keep from adding bindings into this file? That's a great question. This is one that comes up all the time in the Dynamo Forums. What you can do is you can take this stuff and put this node into a function state, and then use a function.apply node. And when I do that, the great thing about this method is we can take this node that's currently in that function state. That is my function. In my view is my argument. We're going to do the same thing down here. That is my function. My view is my argument. These are my boundaries. I've got nodes on top of nodes. That's okay. We sort of meant to do that here. I'm going to go ahead and hit delete. I'm going to run this once more. Run this once more. Don't have stuff happening on top of stuff, which is good, right? Because when I'm authoring, I don't want that content to sort of repeatedly put, content into Canvas. I don't want smoke detectors on top of smoke detectors, 10,000 elements, 20,000 elements on top of each other, creating 20,000 to the 20,000th power warnings in your Revit file, and then nobody can get into it. Yeah, those are not fun. So element binding is good. But here we're going to go ahead and we're going to save this graph. But I've modified the content and I just saved after something was created in Revit, right? Let's go back and let's check out that file size. Refresh this. It's still at 66K. It's still down. The other one's still high. Let's go ahead and let's open up no creation yet. And let's run that again. I've got elements on top of elements, right? Which is what I said I didn't want before. So this is one way to sort of permanently suppress the bindings. Bindings don't get serialized into function apply nodes because we don't know what function you're going to receive. So we don't know what type of data. It might not be consistent. It might not be a function that creates a Revit element at all. So it doesn't get sort of serialized in the file, which is nice because it means we can avoid it. What's another way that we can avoid that? I'm going to open this up one more time, and then I'm going to do file save as. And I'm going to call this player to player. we go. All right, I'm 11 minutes in, I think. Yeah, so I'm actually I'm gonna finish under on time here. I hope you've got some extra stuff to fill with. Maybe like a generative Rubik's Cube or something. Be interesting. I don't know. All right, so we'll take our document current and we're gonna wire this in, and this should put bindings into the file, right? All right, so this is on player. I'm gonna go ahead and delete all of the clock. I'm gonna hit run. Content's been created, hit save, hit close. Let's have a look at that file. Hey, it's another big one. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna edit with Notepad++, and I'm gonna just do Control F, bind, go to the binding section. Great thing with Notepad++ is the syntax highlighting. This tells me where highlights bright red when I get next to that bracket, so that I can see the start of my bracket and the end of my bracket. Everything between the brackets, a digga deleted, is now gone. We'll save that file, we'll close that file, we'll come back here, and instead of running this through Dynamo, I'm gonna run this through Player. Now, the great thing with Dynamo Player is it opens up headless so nobody sees it, right? Which is really, really nice because it means nobody has to worry about any of that stuff. You can do some really great stuff in terms of user interface, simplify down for users. The other thing that's great about it is the file doesn't get saved after you run it, because there's no way to save the graph because it's headless, which means the file size stays low, which means every time we run the graph, we should get a new clock. And I don't know how fast I'm going to be able to sort of run this. You can see that we went across the magic minute mark and we got a new minute hand to sort of move over, which is kind of nice, right? So you can run that over and over and over again. We could also take, and I'm going to try one more sort of demo here. We're going to close this. We're going to go into Dynamo, and we're going to do one more bound example with the 7 minutes I have left. So I hope you can make a really, really quick generative Rubik's Cube. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open no creation yet. Our base file, no bindings in the file, no function passing or anything like that. Oh, or maybe I do have function passings in there now. We'll wire that one in, so this looks legit. And we'll wire that one in, so this looks legit. Save that. We'll delete all this stuff, clear out the clock one more time, hit run one more time. There it is one more time. Save it. I meant to do a save as. Let's check that file size. Found again, 111. There's the one that I'm going to have to go back and edit that. So I'm going to pull that open now just because I can. Otherwise, I'll forget and I'll go to show this to somebody else and it won't work. All right. Now, bound again is set up. It's got bindings in the file. We can tell that from the file size. Let's go ahead and close Dynamo. And let's try bound again with Dynamo Player. All right. We're going to hit run. What's going to happen? File saved. Elements know what they are. Bindings are packed into the file. They exist in this file. What's going to happen? Dynamo's open in the background. We got an update to the time. We didn't get a clock on top of a clock. What if I run it again? Now we have a clock on top of a clock. Why? When the elements were recreated a second time, they're going to receive a new element ID because we've got a sketch. Because we've got new stuff inside a sketch element, we've got new stuff inside of the sketch, which means the overall element is going to be different than the element or the GUID that was passed before. So this will only work one time through Dynamo Player, right? And then you see it and you're like, what the heck's going on? Stuff's on top of stuff, undo, and then you try it again. And we've got stuff on top of stuff, and well, this isn't right, right? We undo a couple times, and then we try it again, and now it's working. Undo once, put it back to whatever time it was back in the day, run it again, the GUIDs align, the clock updates its time. Undo once, the GUIDs align, the clock updates its time. the GUID's no longer aligned because we have new elements after running this a second time, and we've got clock on top of clock. Hopefully this makes some sense. We'll see if we get about getting you guys some files if anybody wants to play around with it. Otherwise, hope to see everybody in a couple of weeks. I think we're talking about Civil 3D stuff. Sol and Sean will be able to confirm that for me. Otherwise, I will see everybody around on the internet. Feel free to hit me up on Twitter, hit me up on the Dynamo Forums, and hit me up in the Community Conversations file.
All right, thanks Ghost Jacob for the presentation today. Appreciate you being here in spirit. So that's the end of today's presentation. We're a little shorter than usual, but if anyone has any questions on what you saw today or anything else, please do sing out. See, there's one in the chat. So Jason's asking, can you just put a delete node to delete the current elements so you don't get a clock on top of a clock using a pass-through method? You could, but without binding, you would be deleting only the one you've just created, which might not be as useful to you. So anything that was previously created would still exist. So feel free to come off mute and off or on video and ask a conversational question if you want to, or keep posting in the chat. More than happy to ask or answer anything about Dynamo, not just what you saw today. This is a conversation about Dynamo in general, usually with a specific topic. But if you've got a burning Dynamo question about something else, feel free to ask it. Do my best to answer it and get back to you, worst case scenario, if I can't.
Everybody's just in awe of the clock, I'm sure.
Yes, there's a very, very good comment earlier that would be the world's most expensive clock if you had to buy a Revit license to place it on the screen, for sure. Maybe there's more expensive ones if you get into diamonds and things out there, who knows? Yeah. All right, so if there's no further questions, moving on to our upcoming sessions. All right, we have one from Thomas. So when will we see the Dynamo Dictionary help link in the nodes again? Good question. We actually have done that work now for Dynamo 2.14. You're going to see Dynamo Dictionary content inside of Dynamo on the nodes for Dynamo Core first, and then future releases beyond that, we're targeting all of our host integrators to get that content as well. So everything on Dynamo Dictionary for Dynamo out of the box, you'll see, and Dynamo 2.14, minus I think 44 nodes, which we've added, which we're going to target for 2.15, and then the Revit stuff coming next, and then all of our other host integrators, we're going to look to try and get that content in over the course of the year as well. So you should be able to right click on any node, click help, and get a bunch of awesome documentation around a more sort of like simplistic, non-technical way of describing what the node does, sort of an in-depth dive, and then also a screenshot as to how to use that node with other nodes connected into it. So it's pretty cool stuff. All right, so if you've got any other questions, keep singing out. Otherwise, the next session's upcoming. We have some special guests, which is going to be awesome. So getting more civil with Dynamo is our second set in Dynamo and Civil 3D. We have a special guest, Paulo Serra, who has created two of the most awesome Civil 3D Dynamo packages, the Civil Connection and the Civil Automation. I can't remember the name of it for the second package, but Civil Automation nodes that just extend the whole capability of Dynamo and Civil 3D, which is pretty cool. Then on April the 28th, we have Dynamo and Revit's API. So this is going to be the third in this series around Dynamo and Revit specifically. And we're going to be jumping into how Dynamo talks to the Revit API and how you can do that too, if you want to. We have a special guest for that, Nick Boytz, who is one of our forum moderators, which is awesome. And then on 12th of May, we have Dynamo and Civil 3D's API. So this is also caveated AutoCAD's API as well as Civil 3D's API. And that's with our special guest, Zachary Jensen, who is the author of the Canva package in the Civil 3D world. So some really cool stuff upcoming. Please do come and join us. We'd really like to see you there and get more conversations flowing.
Awesome. So I just shared some helpful links, including one on how you can become a community conversation speaker, but a whole bunch of other links. So we're just wrapping this up. If you're looking for other ways to connect with the Autodesk community, I have a few resources for you. don't run away just yet. And at the end of this session, you will get a survey. It's really helpful for Saul, Jacob, myself to help shape the future sessions by just adding your 2 cents and maybe some suggested content or sessions you'd like to see. All right, next, please. You can explore the many ways to connect with the Autodesk community, including the global network of user groups, the Autodesk Group Network, our industry-focused communities, helping colleagues solve business challenges together, the Autodesk Forums, of course, staying connected with us on Twitter. And I've pasted some of those. I've also given you the Dynamo Forums, the Dynamo Blog, and the playlist for the rest of the series. So lots of good stuff. I also gave you the blogs. We have the Voices blog, which is community for community. And you can be an author of that if you'd like. We're looking for Dynamo authors. So if you want to contribute, when you can as an author on the Voices blog, please reach out to me. So thank you, everybody. While you're thinking of it, go out and sign up for more of the community conversations so they're in your calendar and you'll be here. And thank you so much for attending. We welcome your feedback. So please make sure to complete that survey. Thank you, Saul and virtual Jacob.
Thank you everyone so much for joining us today. Really appreciate your time. Hopefully you learned something, multiple things maybe would be awesome if you learned multiple things. And feel free to reach out over Twitter or LinkedIn or anything if you've got any further questions through the Community Conversations portal. We're more than happy to spread what we know back to you all.
The recording
enjoy the rest
session,
of your Thursdays.
Oh, sorry. The recording for this will go into that playlist as well as be on the event page where you joined. So if you need to share it with others, feel free to do that and encourage them to attend. So thank you.
Thanks,
See you at the
everyone.
next one.